Auschwitz. Everybody knows this word, that name. We heard about the horror that stands behind that name. As I do on all my tours, videos and documentaries, I will focus on the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and how they survived this concentration camp. My goal is to get to know them, to learn from these courageous men and women, to be proud of their faith. I will not focus on the horror of Auschwitz. For that, there are thousands of books written, hundreds of movies and thousands of documentaries that you can watch. But because of that place, we still need an introduction. We need a short summary, a historical and psychological summary of that place. This is the first episode of the series Jehovah's Witnesses and the Auschwitz concentration camp. Germany under the Nazi regime. Jewish citizens have been excluded since 1933. At the beginning of 1939, shortly before the outbreak of the Second World War, there were still about 210,000 of Jews living in Germany. From 1939 onwards, the Wehrmacht conquered more territories during the Second World War, and the National Socialists wanted to make Germany and the conquered territories free of Jews. The German word is Judenfrei. On 20th of January 1942, 15 representatives of the Reich met in a villa at the Wannsee, close to Berlin, to the Wannsee Conference, to organize the forced deportation and killing of more than 10 million people, the European Jews. The Nazis call it the final solution. The brutal plan of the Nazis is to systematically transport all Jews to Eastern Europe and kill them there. In Auschwitz-Birkenau alone, over 1.5 million people, mainly Jews, are murdered. A huge camp that was designed to kill people. The victims in Auschwitz were shot or killed with gas. The gigantic mass murder is rationally planned and carried out without compassion by a highly civilized nation in one of the most highly developed regions of the world at that time. What are the roots of Auschwitz? Auschwitz's cultural, technical and symbolic origins belong to the heritage of the European continent and human history in general. Auschwitz was not a random event. Auschwitz was not a result of a single impulse. No. Enzo Traverso said, Auschwitz did not change the forms of civilization. If the gas chambers are seen today as a collapse of civilization, it is because they represent a historical moment that shows the destructive potential of civilization at the dead ends into which this civilization has fallen. The anti-enlightenment tendencies combined with technical and industrial progress, the state's monopoly on the use of force, and the rationalization of methods of the rule have shown that annihilation itself is one of the faces of civilization. End of quote. So the motives of that crime, racism, anti-Semitism, anti-communism, eugenics, and the instruments used to carry it out, war, conquest, and extermination on an industrial scale, are part of the context of European civilization. The idea that civilization can presuppose the conquest and extermination of inferior, as well as the instrumental concept of technology for the organized destruction of enemies, were not created by the Nazis. These concepts have existed in Europe since the 19th century, when industrial society emerged. The violence and crimes of the Nazis arose from a common base in Western culture. During the Second World War, all the elements co-occurred. Think about that. The Christian anti-Judaism of the Middle Ages, the Spanish Inquisition, the invention of the guillotine, machine guns, industrial slaughter, rural exodus, Henry Ford's production line, and anti-Enlightenment thinking. All these things together formed theories of racism. The colonial wars and the First World War formed the social context and the mental landscape in which the final solution could be conceived and implemented. All these ingredients created a technical, ideological, and cultural terrain and made Auschwitz possible. Yes, the 20th century brought the world an accumulation of terror and crime unprecedented in human history. The violation of fundamental human rights, extreme racism, and xenophobia shaped the image of occupied Europe. The Nazis established many camps in occupied Europe, but Auschwitz became the most famous. Why? Because of the enormous number of victims, the size of the campgrounds, and the evidence of the crimes that had been preserved. Auschwitz, which operated from 1940 to 1945, was the largest center of the mass extermination of European Jews and also the largest concentration camp for prisoners of different nationalities, a facility for slave labor, a place where executions and criminal experiments were carried out, and where victims' property was looted on a large scale. The Nazis sent at least 1.1 million Jews, nearly 150,000 Poles, 23,000 Roma, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 10,000 of prisoners of other nationalities in this camp. All the nations affected by Auschwitz have created their own Auschwitz, their own metaphor of the camp, and their own interpretation and forms of commemoration, depending on their traditions and religions. Auschwitz is a symbol. It's a symbol of the worst evil that human beings can commit, and a symbol of the absence of humanity. It has become proof of the possible destructive barbarism even in a highly developed, civilized society. The camp's name has even become a code describing a decline of human culture, thought, behavior, and relationships during that time. At the same time, it became an example of social indifference and apathy, and of the irresponsibility of the institutions and organizations that should have reacted immediately when the camp still existed and thousands of victims were sent there. Auschwitz also has a symbolic meaning for the Bible students, as Jehovah's Witnesses were named at that time, who were also sent to this camp because of their faith. Listen to the stories of these courageous men and women in this concentration camp.